Hello. Today we are hosting Emmanuel Dupuy, who is president of the Institut Prospective in Sécurité en Europe and also associate expert with MENA Research Center. And we will be talking about Israeli-Iran conflict and the United States strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and the implications for the region and for the world. So, Emmanuel, let's start actually with explaining the dynamics behind the Israeli decision to strike the Iranian nuclear facilities on June 13th. And the Iranian response as well to these strikes. Was it successful? Was it not? And what are the let's say implications for those countries in the short and midterm?
Well, first of all, there is a momentum. The momentum was the reboot of the 2022 Vienna talks which would not happen in Vienna but in Oman, between the Iranian negotiators with Abbas Abashi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and normally the other participants, namely the Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and China, and the European Union, even though we know that the United States was not particularly on that track since Donald Trump already went out of the joint comprehensive plan of action, the so-called JCPOA, which was signed by his predecessor in 2015. So the overall picture is that there was intensive reassumption of reboot of this negotiation process, which was absolutely not what Israel wanted for various reasons. First of all, because in 2015, Israel, at that time already Benjamin Netanyahu, said that the international community got it wrong, and that only focusing on the nuclear issue, on the obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, none more than 3.67% of enrichment of uranium was not enough, and that was missing the regional agenda, the regional ingerence agenda of Iran in the direction of Syria, in the direction of Lebanon, in the direction of Yemen, in the direction of Iraq, and against the Arab countries along the Persian Gulf. Second of all, a second issue, which was not in the deal in 2015, which may have fueled the military response of Israel, is the fact that no text limited or had the will to limit the ballistic threat, the ballistic capacity of Iran. We know that Iran has more or less 2,000, some would argue 3,000 ballistic missiles that can go from short, 100, 200 kilometers, to very far, 2005, 2006 kilometers, therefore being capacity to strike the Balkanic states, Romania, Bulgaria, and up to Austria when it comes to the European Union. So this is the spectrum. This is the momentum which accelerated the military response of Israel. Israel stating and tending to prove that the Vienna peace agreement, the JCPOA, and the United Nations resolution which followed gave time for Iran to have a shadow program, a shadow nuclear program, which was not concerned by the agreement. And this is what led Israel to consider that it had to do by force what by law was not possible of doing, since the agreement of 2015 went out and were no longer relevant in 2023. There is the urgent need to reboot or have new agreements. And this is why and how Israel took the stance to consider that diplomacy was not enough and that the time to strike had come.
I understand. But what are the implications of those strikes? I mean, like immediate implications for Israel and for Iran as well?
Well, first of all, it's a direct blow to international mediating process, since Israel considered that it's not relevant to discuss with Iran. Second of all, and therefore abiding by the principle that now peace comes through strength, and that you need to have strength in order to build peace. We may come to that concerning the so-called peace agreement or the so-called ceasefire, the truce, which was launched by American president, not by Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, but that Iranians are willing to comply and to take in consideration. So the second element is that for the first time, Iran and Israel were fighting and are litigating on a direct basis and not throughout proxy and not throughout the agenda of the Palestinian-Israel conundrum. There's a new implication where, and this hasn't started a few days ago. It had started a few months ago after the Israeli strike against a certain number of radars, a certain number of military ballistic launchers after the strike by Iran on already Israel, linked to the ballistic missiles launched by both Hezbollah on one side, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthi from Yemen. So the new agenda is a direct fight above the countries who wanted to avoid it: Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf countries, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, and of course not forgetting Iraq, and directly Iran. So this is what we call in international relations a game changer, where now the two contenders, one side Israel, on the other side Iran, are fighting a direct war. What is new in this perspective is that the Arab countries who still, for some, do not recognize Israel, or for most of them, still consider that Israel is a threat and a problem, were not, of course, in the capacity nor in the will to sustain Iran, even though there has been some communiques saying that Israel committed a war crime, that there should not be war but peace, and at the same time, allowing Israel air forces to cross their skies to drop the bombs on Iran, and of course, therefore being considered by Tehran as co-belligerent of this conflict, which is in contradiction with the fact that all of the countries, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Libya, Yemen, and the Bahrain and the Palestinian Authority said they were all against the attack of Israel, which was a preventive strike. Let's not forget that. But at the second time, a few hours ago, all of the states made a comment and made a joint communique saying they were against the Iranian strikes on Qatar. So you very well understand that in this new Middle East, which is now forced by the direct litigation and direct opposition between Israel and Iran, these countries do not want to choose. They do not want to choose to be allied of Israel, which for their population would be impossible to sell and to accept. And on the other hand, they cannot sustain Iran because Iran is an opponent when it comes to a Shia, Sunnite, Arab, Muslim litigation and opposition.
Yes, exactly. And especially Iran also has its own agenda and division
and the agenda
and ambitions for the region.
And the agenda of Iran is disturbing the peace, regional stability, and attacking both Israel and, throughout its proxy, the countries in which Iran wants to have a role to play and an ambition. Bahrain, because there is an important Shia minority, an important Shia population. In Lebanon, with the immense and tremendous and very robust military and political force of Hezbollah, and of course with the Houthi, who are fighting against against Israel since the 7th of October 2023, but moreover, which are fighting a war since 2014, 2015 against the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. Actually, we are talking, you have mentioned the Donald Trump ceasefire proposition. So I'd like to ask you a question about the US direct involvement. And a few days ago, we were all observing the tankers flying from the United States to Europe and to the Middle East. And you were mostly anticipating the the US strikes on Iran. But what was the main driver of the Trump administration to actually authorize and to carry out those strikes on Iran? And the second issue is, what are the possible implications for the United States of those strikes?
Well, why did the United States finally decide to intervene when they could have done it at the beginning of the Israeli military operation, or they could not have done it? They chose a middle voice, if I may say so, deciding to participate, but not that much. Decided to do a one-shot bombardment, which happened on the nuclear facility of Fordo, of Natanz, and of Isfahan, but not more. Flying the furtive B-2 strong bombarders, planes with the immensely tremendous and huge detonating capacity of the GBU-57, GBU-43, the MOAB, the massive bomb breaker, in order to have the capacity to break the defense, literally the rock and the cement defense of Fordo base. They were the only one who could have done it, because the Israelis do not have this capacity. So it was a sort of a help, a hand given to Israel, but not more, because they did not follow up on the operation. And as you very well know, and as we are now witnessing it, now the United States is pushing for a ceasefire, asking and calling both Israel and both Iran to stop when they bombarded Iran. So we're sort of in a very crazy, a very schizophrenic agenda. The Iranians followed up by a retaliation strike a few hours ago on Al Udeid base in Qatar, where you have 10,000 American soldiers. But as we know of today, they warned and they preventively said to Emir Al Thani, the Emir of Qatar, that they were going to strike, when they were going to strike, and furthermore, therefore, giving the Americans the option to say that it's not that important, because there was no casualties. And what we know now of today is that the bombs that were used were not armed. They just sent the missiles without the detonating capacity. So it's a sort of response to it is a clear response, a symmetric response to what the Americans did. Because what we do know now is that Donald Trump was very eager in his press conference after the strikes, the 6 or 7 strikes, bombs that were the BU bombs that were used for Fordo and Natanz and Isfahan, and the 20 ballistic cruise missile Tomahawk missiles, which was not sent by air but coming from submarines in the Gulf of Oman. We do know now, having heard the press conference of General Dane Kane, the Joint Chief of Staff, and the Minister of Defense, Secretary of Defense Peter Hegest, that it's not clear that the Americans really destroyed the nuclear facility. It's not even clear whether or not they managed to destroy the more or less 400 kilograms of enriched uranium at 60%. So we may be witnessing a sort of dance a very coordinated dance. I strike, but it has no effect. You strike, but there is no casualty. Americans give the impression that they were following up on Israel totally, which Israel does not take. Since the Americans have proposed a ceasefire, that Israel does not want to follow, or
Exactly.
hasn't said it doesn't want to follow at this step. So did the Iranians, by the way, as we are speaking, the unilateral truce or the unilateral ceasefire proposed by Donald Trump a few hours ago is not accepted and is not respected, nor by Iran, nor by Israel.
Exactly, and it actually leads us to the next question, and the question about this ceasefire. So Donald Trump, I mean, I'm oversimplifying things. So the United States carried out strikes on Iran, then Iran somehow theatrically retaliated on the U.S. base in Qatar, and then Donald Trump, the U.S. president, says, "Okay, so let's make truce." But we've seen that for example, the Israelis are saying that Iran has violated this possible ceasefire. The Iranians, from what I understood, are also tying the possible ceasefire to the broader and wider nuclear talks. So nobody is, let's say, buying this ceasefire proposition made by Donald Trump. So my question is actually whether this ceasefire is still possible, maybe under some different source, if I may, or also what are the reasons, for example, the Israelis and the Iranians are not accepting this immediate ceasefire. So could you please elaborate on it?
Well, I think the question of interest should be put here. Who has an interest to stop the fight and who has interest to continue to strike? I think Israel has changed its ambition or its targets, its objective to obtain. At the beginning of the strikes, it was clear it was to deter or to destroy what they thought, the Israelis thought, was a very dangerous step from 60% of enriched uranium to a military capacity of 90%. And with 400 kilos of 60% uranium, if you have the methods, if you have the scientists, if you have the capacity, you can, and the centrifuges, you can enrich it in a few weeks to go from 60 to 90. Therefore, giving the impression that with 400 kilos, you have more or less, maybe less than 10 bombs, but you have something. And so the Israelis said, we are midnight -1. We have to act now. So they anticipated what they thought or what they said should have been the proposition of the international community. And thus bringing the idea that Israel has no interest to stop. Because Israel at the beginning wanted to deter the nuclear capacity, but I should add, after it had destroyed the ballistic capacity of Iran. And this is, I think, the important issue here, is that Israel had a double agenda. The first agenda was to stop or to, let's say, delay significantly the nuclear program. The less ambitious would say that they want 1, 2, or 3 or 4 or 5 years, and others would say, I do not believe that totally, that the nuclear program is off. It's dead. Of course, Iran is a huge country with 92 million inhabitants. It has the capacity to regenerate really rapidly, regardless of the sanctions, of course. Well, the sanction will delay that. I think Israel, starting with a ballistic ambition target, added another agenda. And this is where they have no interest of stopping the fight now. To deter the international, what we call the Pasdaran, the guardian of the revolution, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corporation, which is considered by the United States and by Israel as a terrorist organization, which is considered as a paramilitary troop in Iran, as strong, some say way stronger than the official army. The agenda of Israel, as it has been doing it with a quite significant efficiency in Lebanon, is to destroy the leadership of the Revolutionary Guard. And this leads us to what happened in September 2024, when they destroyed and disrupted the leadership of the Hezbollah. I think Israel is following up on that. They have killed already 25 high-ranking generals. They have also eliminated all of the nuclear scientists, which could have rebuilt the nuclear capacity. And so forth. They're buying time on one hand, but the, let's say, subjacent agenda is to destroy the system by the interior. And if you take away the leaders, what will come of those behind? Will they follow? Will they revolt? Or are they going to turn their weapons against their leadership, their weakened leadership? I think that maybe Israel is thinking of this regime change, not American point of view, it's an Israeli point of view. I think the Americans followed Israel on this, but did not believe it could work. And still, I think, do not believe it could work. But they left Israel on the idea that if you destroy the leadership of the Secret Service, the Basiji militia, the more or less 350,000 troops, paramilitary troops, if you deter the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, namely the most prominent danger in the region, the Al-Quds force. This is why Donald Trump, in his press conference, mentioned the fact that one of the justifications to strike Iran, and he said it this way, is that the Iranian proxies have the responsibility of the death of 40 American military servicemen and civilians. No, 1,000, not 40,000, 1,000 dead during the last 40 years of since the revolution, the February 1979 revolution, and abiding by the facts, justifying that America did the first strike in January 2020, eliminating General Qasem Soleimani. So I think
we all remember this. Yes.
I think the Israelis are abiding by the fact that they're not doing anything more than what the Americans have said already in 2020. Get rid of the securitocrat aristocracy, quote, of the theocratic Islamic Republic of Iran. And if you take away this leadership, then comes the phase after. Are we in this phase? I would argue that we could have thought that a few hours ago, but I think the regime change is no longer on the table, since I think the Americans have understood it would not work, and that the Israelis are taking away all of the obstacles, all of the caveats to leading to a regime change. Namely, if you take away the Basiji, if you take away the Revolutionary Guard, and you deter their military capacity or their planification, operational classification capability, then the streets can go, wander, and not be jeopardized or not be frightened by the Basiji or the Revolutionary Guard, because they have been collapsed.
No, that's true. But I also would like to talk really quick, actually, about the economic implications of this conflict, because we've heard a few days ago there was this idea of Iran to close the Hormuz Strait, and still, from what I understood, the Hormuz Strait wasn't sealed, wasn't blockaded. But so the question is, what are actually the economic implications of this crisis? The oil prices we've seen there was a hike, and can actually Iran close the Hormuz Strait? Because that's also the question. Do they have the capabilities to do it physically?
Well, there's this threat which has been voted by the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, saying that Iran should block the Hormuz Strait, but not only block the Hormuz Strait. At the same time, it is targeting the bases of the United States, and by the way, adding bases, ships belonging to the United States, Great Britain, and France. Therefore, putting the false idea that they are in war with all of these countries, when only they have to respond to the Israeli bombings and to the punctual American bombing. Technically, they could perfectly, operationally based, block the Hormuz Strait, which is not that difficult because it's only 52 kilometers from the septentrional part of Oman and the south coast of Iran. It's more or less 120 kilometers long, going from the Oman Gulf, therefore the Indian Ocean, to the Persian Gulf, therefore to the more open waters with the United Arab Emirates on one hand and Iran in the northern part. But do they have the interest, and what would be the interest to do that? First of all, if you close the Hormuz Strait, the impact will not be in regards to the Occident, but to the oriental part of the world. 20% of the world's hydrocarbon transits through the Oman Strait. That is 20 million of barrels a day. Among these 20 millions of barrels a day, 80% of the oil from Iran goes from Iran throughout the Strait of Hormuz to China. If Iran closes the canal, the Hormuz, how would China get its oil and its gas, which is part of the Lion-Dragon Agreement, which was signed in 2021 for 25 years? The idea is very simple. China will invest, the official figure is 400 billion, but let's make it shorter and more pragmatical, between 250 to 400 billion of euros for a period of 25 years, infrastructure, logistics, agriculture, maybe nuclear aid, so on and so forth, at the condition that Iran furnishes the gas and the oil which needs China. If you close the strait, it does not work. So what would be the interest of Iran of doing that? Very narrow. Other point, when it comes to economy, a certain number of countries, let's take Russia, have built their robustness or their resilience in regards to the Ukrainian crisis with a level of price of the Brent Brut, which is the reference, international reference, not going too low and not going too high, between 50 and, let's say, $80 per barrel. If you close the Hormuz Strait, the prices will collapse. And this is not in the interest of Russia, which needs money to fuel its war in Ukraine. It is not nor in the interest of China, because the prices was agreed before, and they will not negotiate the price because it's part of the deal. They are buying oil, which is now between 65 and $75. With the crisis, there has been a rapid impulse, a rapid, let's say, increase, an increase in the prices, but not that far, not that much, 22%. And then it went down to only 1%, and now it's stabilizing. So there is no economical interest for Iran to do that. But there is a political interest, saying that they control the entry and the exit of 20% of the world economy, or 20% of the world consumption of electricity, on a very pragmatical and a very diplomatic posture. Normally, the Strait of Hormuz has two mandates, Oman and Iran. So if Iran closes, Oman will not close. So you can go and use the open waters of Oman which can open its waters for the blockage of the other part of the strait. Or if Iran wants to go to this crazy position, then fight against Oman and maybe potentially be in capacity to respond to military, an American military presence. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, just flying to La Hague for the NATO summit, said that if a Iranian ships blocks the Hormuz Strait, it will be blown away by the aircraft cruisers, the Tomahawk missiles, or the planes in the area. Let's not forget that you have inside the Persian Gulf, therefore jeopardized, handicapped, burdened by the Iranian position, 40,000 American soldiers, 2,000 in Syria, 500 in Jordan, 5,000 in Iraq, 15,000 in Kuwait, 10,000 in Doha, 7,000 in Bahrain, and not more than 500 in the United Arab Emirates. So it's a strong agenda which obliges Iran to be very focused about this idea of closing the Hormuz Strait, because it will reignite the Washington, Beijing, and Moscow position in regards to the agenda, which is in no interest of Iran, because Iran wants to give the impression that both Russia, Turkey, and China, and by the way, Pakistan, are on the same track, which is not totally true. Of course, Minister of Foreign Affairs Abbas Arashi was in Moscow and met with President Putin. But what did the Russians promise? Nothing. There is no military cooperation between Iran and Russia. There's a friendship, there is an economic cooperation, but it's not a security agreement.
No defense clause, indeed. And you've just mentioned actually that this proposition to close the Hormuz Strait coming from the Majlis, from the Iranian Majlis, was also with intention to target not only, but with intention to target also the British and the French vessels. So the question I have, just talking about our country, France, what was our response to this whole new Israel-Iran conflict and the United States bombardment of Iran? How can you actually characterize the official French position and the, let's say, logic that is behind this position?
Well, on one hand, it's a very traditional response. We abide by the law, by the international multilateral system, and that any dispute should be resolved by negotiation at United Nations level. The so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, the nuclear deal, gave birth to a United Nations resolution a week after. So it was enshrined by the United Nations system. I think France is a very normative power, and it wants to build law and commit in the capacity to bring a multilateral perspective on the issue. It's not only about Iran and Israel. It's between Iran and the vicinity it has. It's between us and the relations we have with Israel. It's also based on the fact that France is a bit in a weak spot. It's a traditional response, but it shows its weakness. The weakness of France is that we have a commitment. We said it, resaid it, and I think for the right cause, to call for the liberation of the two French hostages, Cécile Colère and Jacques Paris, which are now prisoners hostages in the prison of Evin, the one that precisely the Tzahal and the Israeli Air Forces targeted a few hours ago. So we have the difficulty of having two hostages, which namely are taken hostage by Iran and using that to put pressure on us. Second of all, we call for immediate ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire, which can be misinterpreted and misunderstood by our Israeli partners, because it gives the impression that if we stop now, then we are preventing Israel to fulfill its agenda. And moreover, we are defending the regime. We are giving a sort of Reza Pahlavi, the heir to the throne, was in Paris yesterday. He made a press conference, and he called this giving a safe line, giving a sort of, I would say the French, the word in French, une bouée de sauvetage, giving it a possibility to maintain its power, restore its power, or to prevent a regime change. And I think France, on the contrary of other European countries, because it's not a European position, even though there was a meeting between French Minister of Foreign Affairs Jean-Noël Barrot, his counterpart, British counterpart David Lammy, Kaja Kallas, the High Representative for External Action Service of the European Union, and Johann Wadepool, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is not a unique European position. First of all, the names that I mentioned, France, Great Britain, European Union, and Germany, do not represent the countries, the other 25 countries, in the perspective of having a 27 state unique position. Second of all, amongst those who are calling for peace, immediate peace, return to the negotiation process, France, Germany, Great Britain, and the European Union, or at least the Commission. Amongst them, there is not a pragmatical, unique way of seeing the agenda. Chancellor Friedrich Merz, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, was very clear, saying that he wanted and he called for peace at the condition that the strike of Israel are continuing and saying, quote, that they are doing the, how do you say that in English? Le sale boulot. They're doing the
dirty job.
Israel, absolutely, thank you, Denys. Israel was doing the dirty job for us, saying and implying that we should have done it 10 years ago. So there's a very weak spot, European External Action Service and the foreign policy of the European Union, CFSP, the Common Foreign Security Policy of the European Union, is not relevant in this perspective because the two major EU countries implied, Germany and France, are not on the same track. You can put that in any way you want at the Hague Summit of the NATO Hague Summit today, 24th and 25th. It will not be resolved. There is not a unique position in regards to the legitimization or the accusation of the Israeli strikes on Iran.
Exactly. And to finalize our discussion, I'd like you to ask, because we were also talking about Russia recently, about this axis, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And we know that Iran was quite helpful to the Russian military campaign against Ukraine, supplying some technology, supplying drones. So how do you assess the impact of the Israeli-Iran conflict on the Russia's military capabilities? Because as you have rightly mentioned, there is no agreement on defense clause between Russia and Iran. But at the same time, we know that there was some military cooperations. Russians were promising to supply some C-300s and C-400s, if I'm not mistaken, to Iran, the air defense systems, the aircraft as well. But Iran was supplying Russia with the drones, for instance. So how potentially it may impact Russia's campaign in Ukraine, if any?
Well, it's not, on one hand, it is serving the, let's say, the silence of what is happening in Ukraine, when we are focused mediatically speaking on the missiles launched by Iran on the American base in Qatar and the strikes of Israel on Iran. We are forgetting, or artificially forgetting, that the strikes on Ukraine continue, whether it's ballistic missiles, whether it is drones. So in a way, it helps Vladimir Putin to continue to do what it has been always denying, to continue to fight and not willing to have any peace capacity or peace agreement. So it helps for its agenda. Second of all, I think we must consider that Russia is no longer a relevant actor in the Middle East. It has lost its stronghold in Syria. It is losing Iran. It has lost Armenia. There was a meeting between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, which is an historical meeting when we know the proximity of Turkey and Azerbaijan. So there will be a real peace agreement between between Yerevan and Baku to the discontent of Russia. So Russia is a bit worried on the fact that if it loses Iran, it will lose its drone capacity. As you mentioned, Iran has given, also more or less given for the first bunch, a certain number of drone capacity, namely the Shahed 136, which have been given to more or less 1,000 exemplary from Iran to Russia. Now, this was at the beginning when Iran gave these drones. Since they're very simple to build, now the drones are built in Russia. So it will not really impact because the drones will still be built in Russia, even if they are built by Iran. That's the first point. The second point is based on the fact that Russia is a bit worried by the fact that the Israeli strike totally destroyed all of the anti-ballistic capacity that Russia gave to Iran. The S-300 and the S-400 were wiped out in the first days of the military raid, giving the impression that if you give the right airplanes to a country, let's think, maybe if Ukraine had F-35, we would not be speaking of the same thing. But with the F-16s, the 51 F-16s, if I do remember the numbers, the 12 Mirage 2000 that we have given, and the some Eurofighter that some countries like Netherlands have given, if this is done in a very intelligent move using the tactics that were used by Israel, they can get rid of the anti-ballistic capacity in a few hours or in a few days. And this is very worrying for Vladimir Putin because it shows that his anti-ballistic missiles is worthless and that on the international scene, it's better to invest in a Patriot, it's better to invest in an American Patriot, a German IRST, or a French SAMPT because it's more efficient and it's not destroyed. When the S-300 and S-4, there is no, to put it in a nutshell, there is no longer any S-300 or S-400 still working in Iran. Israeli destroyed all of them.
That's true. Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for these insightful conversations and your thoughts on this quite a crisis we are observing right now in the Middle East.
Always a pleasure.
Merci beaucoup.